From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, along with Britton Rucker. And here's what's ahead. K-State's Dale Blasi goes over the agenda for the 2019 Cattlemen's Day at K-State, coming up in 2 weeks, which in part will feature presentations on the advent of alternative meat products in the marketplace, what that means for the beef cattle sector. And Britton will have comments then from two of the speakers at the recent Women Managing the Farm Conference, co-sponsored by K-State, from Purdue University, Jayson Lusk, on trends in food consumption and the impact on production agriculture, and attorney Stacey Seibel offering thoughts on farm estate planning. And later on, with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. All this coming up on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Listening to Agriculture Today. Glad to have you along with us. On this segment, a full preview of what is a time-honored event here at Kansas State University for you beef cattle producers. Soon, the university will host the 106th Cattlemen's Day at K-State. It's set for, as always, the first Friday in March, which happens to be March the 1st this year. One of the co-coordinators joins us now. Dale Blasi is a beef cattle specialist, K-State Research and Extension. He's been directly involved in the organization and planning for this event for how many years now, Dale?
Almost 30.
You've been around the block with this program, and it still remains a premier educational and informational event for our cattle producers, right?
Absolutely. It's our universities and specifically our department's celebration of our industry here in the state of Kansas, and an opportunity to show our shareholders and young people aspiring to join the beef industry to see new research opportunities within the department and to bring together our allied industry guests as well as our producers who we strive to serve. The trade show opens at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's 2 hours prior to the scheduled 10 o'clock morning program. So we encourage people to show up early. We'll have coffee, morning refreshments, donuts, and good start.
And it's always a bonus when the cattle industry proper is doing well economically as it is today. So that simply lends to the upbeat nature of Cattlemen's Day.
Absolutely. And you know, we try to serve as a bellwether to different issues that are coming down the road and provide a good objective platform to hear the issue straight out and allow our shareholders to be aware of the situation and to make plans accordingly for whatever that may be.
And that really is what the opening session is all about. And by the way, Cattlemen's Day, as always, at Weber Hall and Arena here on the K-State campus. After the welcome at 10 o'clock in the morning on Cattlemen's Day, you will be, through a couple of presenters, addressing one of the more volatile topics of late, and that is cultured meat, Dale.
Yeah, that's a big issue, and it has caused a lot of folks to scratch their heads in terms of trying to get around it. And we've seen what's happened on the dairy industry side. And so we've invited Dr. Brad Morgan to keynote this address of the plant source and cultured meat products. Brad was formerly on staff at Oklahoma State. In fact, I went to grad school. We were fellow grad students at Nebraska back when they made rocks, and a pretty knowledgeable guy, and today serves as the Senior Director of Protein at Performance Food Group. So we feel like we got a good person there to address this particular issue.
He will give insight on whether or not plant-sourced or cultured meat or both could make inroads as a competitor to beef.
That's right, and again, something to provide our stakeholders an opportunity to think about things that are important for our particular industry in terms of ensuring that we have long-term vitality and viability in our particular industry.
Now, complementing Brad Morgan's presentation on that will be regular on the Cattlemen's Day program, and he always covers the beef cattle market outlook, but he'll also be touching upon alternate protein offerings.
That's right. Dr. Glenn Tonser, he's got his thumb on the pulse pretty well. He's able to address a lot of various issues from international trade, the competition from other alternative proteins, and he just does a nice job of tying a bow around all the issues for folks to hear.
So Glenn and Brad Morgan will launch the program at 10 o'clock, which will take attendees up to the lunch, which is, of course, on site, a fine beef lunch for all involved. And then the program scatters a bit, Dale, in that there are a host of breakout sessions put on by K-State personnel for everybody to pick from.
Yes, there are a host of different presentations, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we're very appreciative and acknowledge the inputs from U.S. Premium Beef providing our brisket. And they provide the best brisket ever, and I guess that is a treat that our attendees do look forward to.
You bet.
And our commercial trade show participants help defray a major cost to this particular event. Dr. Terry Hauser is going to be talking about changes with our beef quality grading. Dr. Nora Schrag over in the College of Vet Med is going to talk more about antibiotic use in ag along with future trends. Dr. Sandy Johnson, my colleague from Western Kansas, is going to talk about alternative methods for pregnancy diagnosis. My colleagues, Dr. Ken Odie and Carol Fike, have been doing quite a bit of work looking at factors influencing value of calves sold through Superior Livestock video auctions. And then finally, Dr. Jenny Borman is going to be talking about genetic control of cattle feed and leg structure, which is very important. And then last but not least, a discussion on the current initiative in the state of Kansas regarding cattle traceability.
And producers can pick and choose from those. It's an a la carte afternoon that they can select from.
Absolutely. I mean, we start the program at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That's after a healthy 1 hour break to catch up with friends and to maybe view the educational posters that'll be present. So, again, they got plenty of time to get around prior to the 4 p.m. bull sale. So there's a slot of time there to pick and choose, an a la carte approach to education, if you will.
And we don't want to overlook something you'll be directly involved with. The beef stocker unit that you oversee will have an open house for you've added a few features to that facility you're very proud of and want to show to folks, Dale.
Yeah, be happy to. We're praying for some decent weather between now and then to make sure we put a decent look on the place. But we're in the process of completing a 2-bedroom student housing project for students that are able to work full-time and be on-site at the facility. We've added some pens and various additions, an opportunity with the depth that we have in the department with the various units. We try to highlight the various units over the years. And so this year we're looking at the stocker unit. So, again, that'll be at 1 o'clock. And then following that, my colleague, Dr. A.J. Tarpoff, our extension beef veterinarian, is going to have a necropsy demonstration to show those folks that are interested in terms of the insights that can be shown through the use of necropsy. And so he'll be following there at 2 o'clock.
That'll be at the beef stocker unit likewise.
Correct.
You mentioned, and we should at least touch upon it, the Legacy Bull Sale will take place immediately following the Cattlemen's Day proceedings. This will be at the Stanley Stout Center to the north end of campus. This is, again, a sale where students from the K-State Animal Sciences and Industry Department coordinate the sale, and there's quality stock going through the ring there.
Well, this is just another example of the depth and legacy of our department. Again, providing our young folks an opportunity to go through the whole process of creating, producing, and actually implementing a bull sale is here. And as you said, we have quality stock that would be available for sale. The sale begins at 4 o'clock, and the afternoon sessions wrap up at 3. So there's a good hour in between there for folks to get out there to the sale facility there at the Stout Building and to view the bulls prior to the sale.
Just run through 30 feed efficiency-tested bulls, 25 registered fall-bred females, 18 commercial heifers, and 5 AQHA ranch performant horses. Those are the lots intended for sale on that day following Cattlemen's Day at 4 o'clock at the Stanley Stout Center. So have that on your agenda as well. And one more feature, which is aligned to a certain extent with Cattlemen's Day. It'll be the evening prior. That'll be February the 28th. This is the 49th Annual Stockman's Dinner, sponsored by the Livestock and Meat Industry Council, based here at K-State, and recognizing an individual who is quite well known in beef cattle production.
Yes, this year our Livestock Meat and Industry Council selected Mr. Jerry Bone from Pratt, Kansas, as this year's Stockman of the Year, and it's a very, very respected award. There's quite a legacy of people that have been previously honored with this prestigious award, and this year we're certainly excited to see Mr. Bone be the recipient.
So as you can see, that evening before, plus the event itself on March the 1st is chock full of things to do, things to see, things to learn about. Dale, it's all covered on the website ksubeef.org, and registration details would be found there as well, right?
That's correct.
The cost is $20 per person. If registering in advance, it is $30 each at the door, covering all the proceedings, the meal, and so forth. And the invitation is out for all of you cattle producers and interested parties to attend Cattlemen's Day 2019 here at Kansas State University, Friday, March the 1st. So looking forward to the program and all it provides and offers. And Dale, thanks for a look ahead to it right here.
Thank you, Eric.
Beef cattle specialist Dale Blasi, K-State Research and Extension, one of the co-coordinators of Cattlemen's Day 2019. The program gets going, as Dale said, once again with the commercial trade show and educational exhibits at Weber Arena, 8 o'clock that morning. The program itself beginning at 10. Once more, all information at ksubeef.org, including the pathway to registration as well as participation details for the annual legacy sale and the Stockman's Dinner the evening prior to Cattlemen's Day. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll return with more. After this, this is the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back with Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. The Women Managing the Farm Conference was just last week, co-sponsored by K-State Research and Extension. At the conference, an array of subjects from food and farm management to how science and technology are impacting the agricultural industry were discussed. More on how technology is serving up superfoods to save the world is agricultural economist from Purdue University, Jayson Lusk. Jayson presented at the conference on the new innovations and demands in the food industry.
There seems to be a lot of pessimism these days about innovation in food and agriculture. People seem to want to avoid GMOs and hormones and gluten and all the other things that seem to be in our food system. But really, I think if we want to solve a lot of our big food problems, we're going to need science and we're going to need innovation. And hopefully there's some stories out there and things that are actually happening on the innovation side that people will find compelling. One thing consumers seem to be increasingly concerned about are issues of animal welfare. And often when people think about animal welfare, they seem to think that the most logical solutions are the so-called more natural solutions. Just open up the doors to the barn, let the chickens and the hogs run free. And there's certainly some benefits to those systems, but I think there are certainly some trade-offs. For example, when it's really cold or really hot, the animals don't like to be outside. when there are hawks or coyotes or dogs around, also not very good for animal welfare. So there are reasons we keep animals indoors for a lot of times. But I think even when we want to improve animal welfare over our current system, we want to use science and innovation to do that, to make sure that the changes we're making actually do improve the animals' lives. And there are a number of interesting innovations in housing systems and egg-laying hens, for example. There's something called an enriched colony cage system that is both affordable but provides the birds more amenities, places to lay their eggs in a nesting box and perches that really can improve the animals' lives, but do it in a way that as food consumers, it doesn't break the bank, so to speak.
Jayson spoke on how precision agriculture could be the key to food sustainability. He reflects on the advances it's made over the years and the impact it's had on the agricultural industry.
One of the big disruptive innovations that's certainly hitting agriculture right now is digital ag, precision ag, sensors hitting agriculture. Certainly farmers today have yield monitors on a lot of other combines and tractors. So that technology has been around now, but marrying data from that with sensors in the soil, with new agronomic models, I think really hold a lot of promise in being more judicious about our use of fertilizer, but also other herbicides and insecticides. Drones today, being able to detect when there are infestations, being able to deal with crop insurance issues. All these things are starting to hit the farm. They're still early to see whether those things are going to pay off economically, but there's a lot of investment, a lot of research that are happening in this space that producers need to be aware of, because it is going to be a comparative advantage for those that can figure out how to marry data, genetics with location, with water, with weather, in a way that can really get the biggest bang for the buck.
Jayson touches on factors driving purchasing taste.
If you look in the grocery store, all kinds of new labels enter the market every day. But one of the things we find in our surveys, where we survey thousands of consumers every year, what we find is that there are really four things that drive most consumers purchasing: taste, nutrition, safety, and price. That it's those four big things that consumers tell us matter really a lot more than a lot of the other things that we hear. So one way to understand that is that when consumers say, I want something that's free of whatever, often what they're doing is they're interpreting that as saying it's either going to be safer or tastier or more nutritious. But I think, price is another big one. We can see big differences across people. Of course, it's not surprising, but we see it in our data. Higher income consumers care a lot less about price than lower income consumers. So there's big differences out there in terms of what people want out of their food system and what they might be willing to pay for things. One of the trends that we see in our research is that there are increasing concerns for things like animal welfare. How do those things relate to meat demand, for example? These are research questions I've been working on with scientists at K-State, like Glenn Tonser, trying to understand what's happening to changes in meat demand. One of the things we've noticed is that the link between issues like climate change, fat content, linking those stories to beef, are things that tend to have a drag on beef demand, and something I think that will be important to pay attention to in the future.
Jayson explains how legislation plays a major role in regulation for food and agriculture.
So one of the things I talked about was the fact that the way people think about agricultural issues, this is not just something they do in a silo, but we tend to lump these things with the way we think about other societal issues, and we form our beliefs not just in isolation, but in social groups. And you can see this, for example, if you look at votes in California on agricultural issues, whether it's GMO labeling, more space for farm animals in animal production systems, whether it's water issues. Votes on those issues tend to be highly correlated with other issues that have nothing to do with agriculture, like, say, same-sex marriage. And now, what would cause the fact for people to vote similarly on, say, same-sex marriage and GMO labeling? Well, obviously, those things are totally unrelated to each other. But what it does tell us is that often these debates don't have much to do with the science, say, of GMOs, but have to do with something a little more fundamental, maybe people's values, urban versus rural values, or how they think about the set of their peer groups and what they think about. So I think it does suggest a really challenging landscape in trying to communicate about some of these agricultural issues. It's more difficult than just saying we need to educate the consumer. It's educating consumers in the groups and through the means and the people that they trust.
Jayson explains the food movement can impact societal change.
Over the last 10 or 20 years, there's been renewed interest in food and agriculture, and it goes by a name, something called the food movement. And there's a lot of positive dimensions to this movement. It's encouraged people to think more about where their food comes from, and it's provided some entrepreneurial opportunities for producers that can produce some niche products, perhaps that have higher margins. So there's some really positive things there. But it's a movement at the same time that tends to be fairly critical of the use of technology in food and agriculture. So I think that's why it's important to critically evaluate some of the claims they make, particularly as they relate to policy. If people want to pay more for certain kinds of food systems that promise absent of certain ingredients, if you have the money and the willingness and ability to do that, go for it. I think the challenge is when it comes into policy making that affect food prices and the availability of options for all of us, it's important to critically evaluate the consequences of a number of those food policies. And again, I think the story of innovation is particularly important. If we want to be able to continue to affordably feed a growing world population and do it in a high-quality way, a sustainable way, we will need science and innovation. And so I think the challenge going forward is how can we work with folks in the sort of food movement era that care a lot about things that we all care about, food quality, safety, human health. How can we do that in a way that we also can bring along the sustainability and the productivity metric at the same time? I think this will be a key challenge going forward.
He goes into the importance of research and extension to the new generation of food-conscious consumers.
There's a lot of misinformation about food and agriculture that's out on the internet. Unfortunately, some of it in best-selling books. I think this is a real role for public educators, whether they're at Kansas State University or my current employer, Purdue University, that the ideal here is that you have a university that's impartial, that can provide scientific, evidence-based answers and solutions to some of these problems. And again, we have a system of extension that has been incredibly successful of educating and spreading science in farm communities. In a lot of ways, some of the biggest educational needs these days are with food consumers, trying to understand what it is they're eating and what are the consequences of eating this versus that. So I think there's a big role for neutral, unbiased parties like universities and even the role of extension in changing, yes, still catering to traditional stakeholder needs, but also thinking more broadly about how we communicate with folks that really want and need information.
Jayson explains why he wrote his book, The Food Police, and how it explains the changes happening economically in the new food movement to bring light to consumers.
A number of years ago, I had a book called The Food Police, and that book was largely motivated by, I think, a real gap and a lack of knowledge about science and innovation in food and ag on the one hand, and then people's sort of misperceptions or beliefs on the other. And I thought it was really important for somebody to engage in this conversation. And I think sort of about the food police as a group of people who think they know better about how you and I should be eating. And again, we all sometimes seek out advice for advisors, whether it's retirement or for taxes. So sometimes we seek out advice, and so it's good to have that advice. But I think the challenge is that there are people that think they sort of know better how others should be eating. They often tend to come from a slightly higher income group, and I think one of the things to really be cautious of is that the kinds of policies that are often suggested by food police, food movement are the kinds of policies that are often going to increase the price that consumers pay for food. So I think, it's not so much their food eating advice that I take umbrance with, but it's often sort of food policy advice that have broad implications for how we all can eat and farm. I think one of the biggest issues that we're likely to see over the next 10 to 20 years is something I call the meat wars, that it's both on the health and nutrition side, but environment and sustainability side. And there's a lot of pressure from food movement and other groups to try to convince the population to reduce meat consumption. Here in the U.S., that's one thing, but I think the really interesting statistic when you look at meat demand is that most of the demand growth is not here in the U.S., but it's global. And you look at developing countries, whether it's China or even India, that's historically been vegetarian, that one of the things people do when they get a little income in their pockets, they want to add animal proteins to their diet. So that's both an opportunity for meat-producing industries to have new customers they might need to bring in, but I think that will all be happening in an environment where there's a lot more controversy about the role of meat in our diets.
That was Jayson Lusk, a presenter at the Women Managing the Farm Conference. If you would like to hear Jayson's entire presentation at the conference, it's available as a bonus podcast episode at agtoday.net. We'll be back with another presenter from the Women Managing the Farm Conference right after this break over the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker. The Women Managing the Farm Conference was just last week, co-sponsored by K-State Research and Extension. Estate planning attorney from Hays, Kansas, Stacey Seibel, presented at the conference, covering key considerations when determining the future of your farming operation.
I think especially for farm families, estate planning is very critical because without having a plan in place, the farm really can't survive to the next generation. So most farm families are using a combination of revocable living trusts to avoid probate and to put provisions in to protect the children that are farming. And oftentimes then they also use limited liability companies.
Stacey discusses revocable living trust and limited liability companies.
Revocable living trusts are a way to own your property, and what happens then is at your death, the trust says what happens to the property, and it's out of the court system, which is very important for a lot of farming families. Limited liability companies, we also call those LLCs. It's a way for people to co-own real estate together and have it taxed as a partnership, but make sure that the family farm stays together and that no one person can force the sale of all the land.
Stacey discusses the challenges with estate planning.
Sometimes we have some specific challenges in estate planning. One might be if we have a child who is on the Medicaid system or on SSI, in which case then we really can't leave that child assets outright because they would have to spend them down and they would be removed from Medicaid during that process. Another challenge would be if we have a child with maybe a very rocky marriage, then we want to make sure that we protect that child's inheritance from that bad marriage situation. And then, of course, if we have a child who just can't handle money, then in that case we want to make sure that perhaps we hold that child's share in trust rather than just let them have it outright.
Stacey goes into the threats of long-term care.
Long-term care has become probably the greatest threat to family farms in the last 10 years than anything else. We used to always be worried about the federal estate tax and death taxes and what would happen to our farm in that event. But now, really what is causing farms to have to be sold and broken up is more about how are we going to pay for mom and dad's nursing home care than anything else. Different options for long-term care. You could self-pay, meaning that you have a pool of liquid assets, maybe $300,000 to $500,000 that you can draw upon to pay for your own nursing home care. And that might be from an IRA, it might be selling cattle or selling equipment or just cash CDs. Another option would be to go with the traditional long-term care insurance, which if you purchase it early enough and while you're still healthy is still a very viable and smart part of any succession plan.
She goes into rider options for long-term care insurance.
There are a couple of rider options for long-term care insurance. One is called a return of premium rider. It does add to the cost of a policy, but what it provides is that if the person passes away without ever having using their policy, then the kids get back all the premiums they've ever paid in. The other option or other rider that is really nice is something called a spousal survivor rider. And with it, what happens is when the first spouse dies, then that surviving spouse's long-term care policy becomes paid up. And that surviving spouse never has to make a premium payment anymore on their own long-term care.
Stacey stresses that each individual estate plan is different and the importance of seeing an attorney when making these important decisions.
Usually we recommend that you review your estate plan every 5 years or whenever something major happens, like if a child were to pass away or if the child who you thought was going to be the successor farmer, if they decide to no longer farm, then that would be some indication that you would need to update your estate plan. And every estate plan is different for every family because every estate plan has to be really fine-tuned to those families' goals and specific circumstances. And so you would want to sit down with an attorney and talk about what your goals are and how you want to see that farm go to the next generation.
That was Stacey Seibel, a presenter at the Women Managing the Farm Conference, discussing estate planning for your farm operation. I'm Britton Rucker for Agriculture Today.
Thanks, Britton. And rounding out this segment with a couple of today's agricultural news headlines for you, you eligible producers impacted by the trade disruptions still have time to sign up for the USDA program that offers that aid, but not that much time. Here's more from the USDA's Rod Bain.
This reminder to eligible producers from Agriculture Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation, Bill Northey.
Certainly encourage folks to make sure they get signed up by the 14th of February.
For the Market Facilitation Program, created last year to assist producers impacted by trade disruptions. The Undersecretary says most producers have provided necessary production data certification to their local FSA office when signing up for MFP. And in cases where producers are unable to provide proof of yield by the end of Thursday,
producers still have until May 1st to be able to bring in that production information for us to be able to make payments.
Growers who produce eligible commodities from corn to fresh sweet cherries, hogs to shelled almonds can obtain applications for MFP online at www.farmers.gov/MFP before turning those in to their local FSA office. And the Undersecretary adds eligible producers need to only sign up once for MFP to receive both rounds of payments. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Also, the USDA is wanting public feedback on implementation of programs that were changed in the 2018 Farm Bill, and the department has laid out a series of questions they want answered by the public on the matter, either in person or electronically. The USDA has set a listening session at the department's Washington headquarters for February the 26th. It'll also be accepting written comments on implementation of the new Farm Bill through March the 1st. The purpose is to solicit input on priorities, concerns, and requests for new and changed Farm Bill programs implemented by the FSA, NRCS, or Risk Management Agency. Find out more about this at, of course, usda.gov. And the biodiesel tax credit that lapsed at the end of 2017 needs to be extended both retroactively and for several years ahead. That's according to a group of farm state lawmakers urging the House leadership on that. That was spearheaded by Representatives Dave Losbach of Iowa and Darren LaHood of Illinois, 42 additional House members signing that February 11th letter. They're saying the lawmakers are calling for, that is, an extension needed to end the prolonged uncertainty about the policy. They tout the more than 60,000 jobs connected to biodiesel production and the importance of it to rural communities. We'll be back in a few moments after this break. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
I can just see students listening to the assignment, looking at each other.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
The class assignment was to draw a plan for a medieval garden. The site they were given was near McCain Auditorium, the chapel, and the Beach Museum. A good site with buildings to pretend the medieval period here on campus. The timeline for the Middle Ages, or medieval times in Europe, is a long period in our history, starting with the fall of the Roman Empire to the rise of the Ottoman Empire. It's a time of castles, monasteries, cloisters, and a time of early gardens. Also a time of conflict and destruction. As an assignment to landscape architect students, I think it is a very good assignment. It surely will make them think about history and, of course, gardens, and in particular, garden design. In Europe, you can visit restored, preserved gardens which give an idea what we are talking about. I can just see students listening to the assignment, looking at each other. I'm sure many would have to check about medieval times, let alone gardens. Even the spelling of the word medieval might be a problem. I've seen it spelled two ways. I learned about the assignment from a young student whose progress I follow. I suggested he should go to the library and start to read. One book I recommended is The Story of Gardening by Richardson Wright. Reading it gives insight into that period and what the gardens were like. During periods of peace, the gardens grew and expanded. Important parts of the gardens were medicinal herb gardens, as was the vegetable garden and the orchards. Violets grew in the vegetable gardens and were on the menu, chopped up with onions and leafy lettuce for salads. The layout of the gardens was often along straight lines, rectangular plots, and squares with paths in between and low hedges. I don't know if my student friend followed my advice, but when sometime later he forwarded drawings of the project he and his partner had worked on, I was impressed. That is learning, and that is why we learn and keep on learning. Taking another book from my shelves, The Garden, An Illustrated History by Julia Burrell, I looked at photos and old drawings. I read, often used within the design of such parquets or flower beds were labyrinths of the low-growing plants, lavender, marjoram, mint, and thyme, which edged the beds. The usual flowers grown were violets, wallflowers, heart-ease, lilies of the valley, primrose, columbine, bellflowers, peonies, iris, calendula, crocus, snowdrops, and lilium candidum, all typical of the medieval garden. When you look at your own garden or flower border today, you see that today we still grow and enjoy many of those flowers, even here in hot Kansas. As I said, a very good assignment which should open the eyes and minds of students. And I'm very interested to see the final finished assignment of my young student friend. I only wished he enjoyed reading more. A colleague and friend and I are working on the restoration of an early Kansas garden. It's a painstaking project. I took it upon myself to conceptually design a big section which once was an integral part of the old garden. Old for Kansas, but that section is now a blank sheet. Just like a student, I looked at a blank piece of paper with the periphery of the property as being lilacs. It's the same with poetry, stories, or paintings. A blank, empty piece of paper lies in front of you, and you're going to fill it in. If you think big, it is like your life. I came up with a design and used the space so that it would complement what was there and what my colleague had worked on and designed, which I liked. I designed in the spirit of the original garden. We both are going for maximum interest and diversity in plants and color. And you know what? When you look at it, the old medieval patterns and yes, plants do stand out. There are also statues, fountains, and arbors. To top it off, my friend Piet, a bulb exporter and importer, sent me his 2019 Dutch bulb catalog. It is for fall bulbs, as well as spring flowering perennials. It's a colorful catalog with clear, gorgeous photos of the flowers of tulips, many tulips, narcissus or daffodils, crocus, specialty bulbs, many of which would have been growing in the medieval gardens. If you look at the specialty bulbs, we know that they did not only grow in the gardens. Many of those bulbs were brought back during the Crusades by the knights. They planted them on their return near their castles, outside the walls. Today, we call them tinsel flowers. Looking at the catalog, I can go crazy just thinking about naturalizing them and letting them grow. All those bulbs. I know our climate is not the easiest climate to grow bulbs, but as I turned the bulb catalog over, I saw on the back a group of deep purple tulips. They were a new tulip called Kansas Proud. It looks like Queen of Night, but it has a white base. When spring comes, and it will come, go and visit Kansas gardens like Botanica and Wichita or others, and enjoy the spring flowering bulb season.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That's our time for today. Thanks for listening in. For Britton Rucker, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.